They thought replacing me with the CEO's son's girlfriend would be a bold, modern move. What they didn't know was I had built the system that kept their entire logistics empire running, and they were about to feel what it meant to cut off their own oxygen. My name is Brielle. I was the lead systems engineer at NovaTrack, one of the rising stars in real-time logistics optimization. For nearly a decade, I poured everything I had into building Orion, a machine learning-based routing system that reduced fuel costs, maximized delivery efficiency, and saved the company tens of millions over time. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because I believed in what we were building. I believed in logic, data, and smart, lean operations. I didn't go to happy hours or play the politics game. I stayed late, often worked weekends, and documented every improvement I made like my work was a living organism. But loyalty doesn't always mean security, especially when new leadership arrives with a different agenda. It started when Thomas Slate, a former investor, was appointed as the new CEO. He had a flashy vision full of buzzwords like next-gen innovation and Gen Z energy. Within 2 weeks, his son Ryan Slate was hired into a newly created role, Director of Innovation. Ryan was the kind of guy who wore designer sneakers to executive meetings and threw around startup lingo like pivot and synergy without ever touching a line of code. At first, I ignored the noise. I kept my head down and focused on fine-tuning Orion for our upcoming contract with the Eastern Freight Alliance, a deal that could boost our revenue by 20%. But things shifted fast. Ryan started showing up in tech meetings uninvited, interrupting engineers mid-sentence. Then came Kelsey, his girlfriend, introduced as a strategic operations consultant. She had a degree in marketing and had never worked in logistics. But within a month, she was shadowing me, asking questions that didn't make sense, reviewing documentation she didn't understand. The red flags weren't just waving, they were practically smacking me in the face. One Friday evening, as I was finishing a new load balancing feature for Orion, I noticed that our internal file tracking system showed my source code documentation had been accessed by Kelsey, without my permission, and she had exported a copy. I brought it up with Jordan, my direct manager. He shrugged and said, "Maybe she's just trying to learn. It's harmless." But his eyes didn't match his words. That was the moment I realized something bigger was unfolding. From that point, I began backing up everything to my personal, encrypted repository, each line of code watermarked invisibly, each component time-stamped and signed from my home IP address, just in case. Because somewhere deep down, I knew the tide was turning. I wasn't afraid. I was preparing. A week later, I overheard Kelsey in the break room talking to another manager, saying, "The Orion system is great, but it's built on outdated logic. We can totally modernize it." I mean, how hard can it be? I bit my tongue so hard it almost bled. They thought they were quietly pushing me out, but I had already begun designing something better, something smarter, something untouchable. They called it innovation. I called it betrayal, and betrayal has a way of coming back around. The announcement came on a Monday morning. I walked into the main conference room to find all the department heads seated, the air thick with something I couldn't quite name, anticipation maybe, or quiet dread. Thomas Slate stood at the head of the table with that performative smile he always wore during town halls. Beside him, Ryan looked relaxed, even smug, tapping away on his phone like this whole meeting was just a formality. Kelsey sat at the far end, lips curled slightly upward like she already knew what was coming. My manager, Jordan, wouldn't even look me in the eye. Thomas cleared his throat and launched into what he called a bold step forward. He used words like refresh, realignment, and cultural transformation. Then came the bombshell. NovaTrack was restructuring the systems division to embrace a more youthful, agile mindset. My role, he said, was being reimagined. I wasn't even offered a lateral move, just eliminated. The room fell silent. All I could hear was the ringing in my ears. Ryan stood up next. "We're excited to announce Kelsey will be leading the transition efforts in the Orion architecture. Her background in strategy and market adaptability is exactly what we need moving forward." I almost laughed out loud. Strategy? The woman barely understood what a staging environment was. Kelsey beamed, standing slowly like a pageant queen accepting a crown. She nodded at the room, then directly at me and said, "Brielle built a great foundation. I'm looking forward to modernizing it with a more flexible framework." My fists clenched beneath the table. Jordan slid a manila envelope toward me across the table. I opened it mechanically. Termination paperwork, signed and sealed. There was a severance offer, vague talk of future collaboration, and the subtle sting of betrayal so sharp I nearly forgot how to breathe. But I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't give them the satisfaction. Instead, I looked right at Ryan. He smirked. Then he whispered something to Kelsey, and they both chuckled. I stood, nodded to no one in particular, and walked out. But in my head, a switch flipped. That day, they didn't just fire me, they handed me the narrative. I had already prepared. My entire Orion source code was safely backed up, watermarked, time-stamped, encrypted. I had exported the latest version just 2 days earlier, after Kelsey had accessed my files without authorization. My calendar had already been full of quiet coffee meetings with recruiters, and I had even demoed a prototype of a next-gen routing tool I was secretly building on weekends. My instincts had been screaming for weeks. Now I knew why. I went home, logged into my encrypted repo, and ran the integrity checks. Every key function, from the predictive analytics engine to the fuel efficiency logic, was documented, coded on my own laptop, outside work hours. I smiled at the audit trail. Legally, it was airtight. That night, I got a message from a recruiter I'd been speaking with, confirming a dinner with a promising startup, Skybridge. They'd heard about me through the grapevine and were very interested in someone with real-world ML logistics expertise. I replied, "I just became available." But Novatrack didn't stop with the termination. Over the next few days, I began hearing whispers from my old team. Kelsey had started making changes to Orion, deleting directories, cleaning up redundancies, she called it. One junior dev told me she removed a core library because it had too many nested functions. What she had deleted, unknowingly, were the custom modules that handled real-time ETA adjustments. That same week, delivery estimates started failing. Clients were calling. The dashboard crashed twice in a single morning. Jordan told the team it was a temporary bug, but they knew better, and so did I. Ryan doubled down, backing Kelsey publicly, calling the errors growing pains. Internally, however, I knew panic was setting in. The Orion system wasn't just a program, it was a living ecosystem of logic, data interpretation, and predictive routing that only someone who had built it from the ground up could understand. They'd taken me out of the equation and assumed the machine would keep humming, but what they didn't realize is Orion didn't run on luck, it ran on me. And now it was falling apart without me to hold it together. By the end of that week, Novatrack's systems were no longer just glitching, they were imploding. Clients began noticing inconsistencies in delivery times. What was once a seamless dashboard of live route updates became a web of spinning error messages and unexplainable delays. Customer service teams were overwhelmed. One client, a freight company based out of Kansas City, sent a furious email demanding to know why their cargo had been routed in a circle for 2 hours, burning through fuel and time. The culprit? A deleted logic module that once optimized route adjustments based on regional traffic data, something Kelsey had removed thinking it was legacy clutter. Inside Novatrack, tensions ran high. Developers were now stuck patching problems they didn't fully understand. Kelsey kept hosting emergency stand-ups where she barked vague instructions like, "Just roll back to a stable build," even though there was no documented version control since she'd started making changes. Meanwhile, Ryan tried to reassure the executive team that this was a short-term hiccup as they transitioned to a more modern framework. His words were confident, but multiple sources told me his hands were shaking during those meetings. I heard all of this through back channels, old coworkers, LinkedIn messages, and even an anonymous email from a junior engineer with the subject line, "They're drowning." A line inside the message stood out. "They deleted your heartbeat module. The system doesn't know how to breathe anymore." I wanted to feel sorry for them, but mostly I felt something else. Calm. Because by then, I had already moved on. Skybridge welcomed me like I was a missing puzzle piece. The founder, Maya Lin, didn't waste time with corporate pleasantries. In our first conversation, she said, "I don't want someone who follows rules. I want someone who rewrites them." And that was exactly what I was ready to do. I pitched Astra Root, a routing engine built from the lessons of Orion but designed without the legacy limitations. It used deep learning to predict delay causes before they occurred. It factored in things Orion never could: seasonal construction zones, port bottlenecks, driver fatigue analytics. I showed them a demo, a stripped-down model I'd coded at night in my apartment. Maya watched it run for 5 minutes, turned to me and said, "Build this. I'll give you the team." They gave me 4 engineers, 2 data scientists, and full autonomy. We worked out of a shared office space that had no glass towers or fancy boardrooms, but what it did have was freedom, creative, technical, and strategic. I rebuilt every layer from scratch, without the politics, without the ego. Back at NovaTrack, things got worse. One of their East Coast clients, a multi-million-dollar partner who handled cross-border freight, had been scheduled for a live system demo. They expected smooth dashboards, predictive rerouting, and error-free execution. What they got instead was a frozen interface, incorrect cost estimates, and a failed update that corrupted the visual tracking API. I heard from someone who was in the room that when the client rep asked, "Why are your rates showing triple what you quoted?" Kelsey actually excused herself to get water and never returned. That same afternoon, a whisper hit my inbox. "NovaTrack might lose the contract. You didn't hear it from me." I smiled, then opened the dashboard for Astra Root. We'd just completed our first internal simulation with over 98% accuracy across multi-city routes. Our system could handle twice the data load of Orion without blinking. That weekend, I received a call from someone unexpected: Sabrina, a former senior engineer at NovaTrack. She was tired, frustrated, and quietly furious. "I'm sick of watching Kelsey guess her way through code she doesn't understand. You built something that worked, and they tossed it for a vanity project. If you're building again, I want in." She wasn't the only one. Over the next 10 days, I received messages from 5 more engineers. Some I had mentored. Others had worked under Kelsey and had enough. Each message carried the same tone: exhaustion and quiet hope. I didn't respond immediately. I needed time, and more importantly, I needed Skybridge's blessing. So I met with Maya. "I want to bring them in," I said. "They know the system, they know the pain, and they're ready to build again." Maya nodded. "We hire based on hunger, not titles. If they're anything like you, let's talk." And just like that, a new team began to form. The ones who had been silenced, humiliated, or overlooked were now joining the build of something better. Not a revenge campaign, a revolution. Meanwhile, NovaTrack continued to sink under its own arrogance. Kelsey doubled down on deleting irrelevant scripts. Ryan began pushing internal memos, insisting everything was under control. But the truth was spilling fast. Clients were leaving, engineers were quitting, and still they refused to say my name out loud. But I didn't need them to say it, because soon the entire industry would. The industry started whispering before NovaTrack even realized it was bleeding. It began with a quiet post on a logistics tech forum, praising a mysterious new routing system that could adapt to last-minute weather disruptions and traffic anomalies in real time. Then came a LinkedIn article titled "The Future of Freight is Smarter Than You Think," featuring a side-by-side comparison of outdated dashboards and a sleek new interface powered by something called Astra Root. That something, of course, was ours. At Skybridge, we weren't just improving on Orion, we were reimagining the entire logistics infrastructure. Astra Root could ingest live traffic, port congestion data, and even driver fatigue analytics, adjusting entire supply chains with zero human intervention. The demo we built for our first private pitch was lean, fast, and painfully efficient. Clients sat up straighter when they saw it, not just because of what it did, but because of how fast it responded. One of those clients had a familiar name, East Line Transport, the very same client that Novatrack had embarrassed during a botched demo weeks ago. When they showed up at our meeting, they were quiet at first, cautious. But once we launched the live simulation, their skepticism melted. Watching Astra route map alternative freight paths mid-simulation without delay left them visibly impressed. Their lead engineer leaned back and said, "This is what we expected last time from them." They never said Novatrack by name, they didn't have to. 2 days later, East Line reached out with a formal proposal to begin contract negotiations with Skybridge. That meant not just a potential client win, but a massive symbolic blow to Novatrack. And once East Line moved, others followed. Inside Novatrack, things unraveled fast. I knew because my inbox kept buzzing with updates from former teammates, still navigating the chaos. "They've hired consultants to figure out what's wrong with Orion," one message read. "It's a mess. Kelsey won't admit she doesn't understand it, and Ryan's pretending it's all fine." But it wasn't fine. At one point, Kelsey tried restoring older backups of Orion, only to discover they were incomplete, most likely because she had deleted the very files that handled those backups in the first place. One Friday, during a client call, the entire system crashed mid-demo. No one could recover it in time. The client hung up. Meanwhile, I was preparing for something bigger. A podcast invitation landed in my inbox. Logitech Pulse, one of the top shows in the freight tech world, wanted to feature me, not AstroRoute, me. The engineer who'd quietly built the system behind one of the most talked about platforms in logistics. I almost said no. I didn't want to be the face of the failure that came before. But then I thought about every woman who'd been replaced by someone's girlfriend, every coder called too technical, every engineer passed over because she didn't fit the new culture. So I said yes. And when the episode aired, something changed. I didn't call out names. I didn't rant. I simply told the story. How a functional system was replaced for image, how innovation died when politics won, and how I chose to start over, smarter, stronger, and free. It resonated. The episode went viral across industry circles. Messages poured in, support, admiration, curiosity. Former Novatrack clients reached out, former engineers sent resumes, and suddenly, I wasn't just building AstroRoute, I was building a movement. The morning after the podcast aired, my inbox was a storm. There were LinkedIn requests from former clients who had once brushed me off in boardrooms, emails from mid-level engineers asking if there were any open roles at Skybridge, and even a short note from a woman I'd never met. "Thank you. I've been pushed aside too, and hearing your story gave me the strength to push back." But the most surprising message came from someone I hadn't heard from in over a year, Carla Vincent, a former VP at a partner firm who had always been polite but distant. Her message was just 2 lines. "We should have seen your value. Let's fix that." Attached was a proposal for a strategic collaboration between Skybridge and their West Coast distribution network. This wasn't a wave. It was a flood. Skybridge moved quickly. Maya, our CEO, cleared her entire schedule to handle incoming interest. We set up back-to-back demos, sometimes 3 in a day. Our pitch deck was updated daily, stats refreshed after each client integration. And every time we showed AstroRoute in action, especially its real-time correction features and intelligent load balancing, executives leaned in like they were watching magic unfold. It wasn't just code, it was clarity in chaos. And somewhere in that chaos, Novatrack was spiraling. A former colleague, Sabrina, now officially on our team, started sharing snippets of internal fallout. Kelsey had reportedly tried to install a third-party tool into Orion's back end to make things easier to manage. What she didn't realize was that this tool overwrote key configuration files and corrupted a portion of the database schema. In a panic, she attempted a manual rollback without consulting the dev team. The result? An entire week's worth of shipping data vanished. Ryan blamed the devs. Kelsey cried in a meeting. Jordan, my old manager, apparently just sat in silence. Meanwhile, Novatrack's help desk was drowning in tickets, and their two largest enterprise clients had begun exploring other options. One of them was already sitting in our lobby. We signed a letter of intent with Northern Bay Freight, a company worth more than Novatrack's last 3 quarters combined. And as the ink dried, I realized something. Astronaut had become more than just a product. It was a signal that there was a new standard, and it had nothing to do with titles or surnames. After the deal closed, we hosted a small gathering in our open plan office. No champagne, no press, just quiet celebration. Someone brought donuts. Someone else played a playlist called Victory Laps. For the first time in years, I let myself feel pride without checking who was watching. And then, as if on cue, my phone lit up with an incoming message from a number I didn't recognize. It was Jordan. "We need to talk. It's urgent." I didn't respond. The next day, a formal email arrived from Novatrack's HR department with the subject line, Potential Opportunity. The attached PDF was a buyout offer, an official request for me to return to Novatrack as Chief Technology Officer, with promises of full autonomy, direct board access, and a compensation package that nearly made me laugh out loud. At the bottom was a request for a confidential conversation and a line that read, "Your leadership could stabilize the future of this company." Stabilize? They hadn't just destabilized the system, they'd imploded it. I forwarded the file to Maya and our legal team. Maya raised an eyebrow and said, "What do you want to do?" "I want them to pay," I said simply. "Not just money. I want the truth on record." So we drafted our counter. An $8 million licensing deal for Astronaut with one non-negotiable condition, a formal public acknowledgement that I was the original creator of Orion and Astronaut, and that I had been wrongfully removed. Silence from Novatrack for 2 days. Then another email, this time from their general counsel, requesting a meeting. We met in a neutral office downtown in a room that reeked of tension and desperation. Across the table sat Jordan, hollow-eyed, and a legal team that looked exhausted. Their lead counsel tried to haggle over language. My attorney shut that down fast. "The facts aren't up for negotiation," she said. "You can pay now or bleed clients indefinitely." Eventually they caved. And in the final version of the agreement, there it was, on the record. Novatrack formally acknowledges that Brielle Andrews is the sole and original creator of the Orion routing framework and the Astronaut predictive system, developed independently and without the use of company-owned intellectual property. I signed without a second thought. Later that night, as I sat on my balcony watching the city hum below, I opened the official press release they had published. My name was in the headline. My work was in the spotlight. And for once, the truth wasn't buried in someone else's footnote. The same people who fired me had now paid millions just to access the system they once called outdated. And yet, as I read those words, I didn't feel vengeance. I felt justice. The public acknowledgement changed everything. Once Novatrack issued their official statement admitting I was the original creator of both Orion and Astronaut, the industry erupted. Trade publications ran headlines like, "From discarded to dominant, the woman behind the code, and Novatrack pays the price for nepotism." I didn't chase the attention, but I couldn't deny its impact. Within 48 hours, I had interview requests from 5 major tech podcasts, 2 national business outlets, and a logistics innovation panel that had once rejected me as a speaker. Now they were offering a keynote slot. Meanwhile, inside Novatrack, the collapse wasn't just technical, it was cultural. Jordan resigned quietly 2 days after the licensing deal was signed. Sabrina sent me a grainy video of him leaving the building, shoulders hunched, his badge clinking in the tray as he exited. Ryan was suspended pending internal review, though unofficially everyone knew he was being phased out. Kelsey? Gone. Kelsey? She deactivated her LinkedIn and deleted her Twitter after backlash flooded every corner of industry social media. Screenshots of her now infamous Slack messages surfaced online. Messages mocking Orion, belittling outdated engineers, and laughing at the idea that someone like me could still be relevant in 2024. Turns out relevance doesn't care about your opinion. It cares about results. What few people knew was that Kelsey had triggered one last disaster before her exit. In a desperate attempt to salvage what remained of Orion, she tried to implement a patch that rewrote the core analytics engine, an engine she didn't understand. The patch introduced a security vulnerability so massive that vendor data was accidentally exposed during a live sync. Within hours, freight partners were pulling out, citing breach of trust and data negligence. One vendor even threatened legal action. Novatrak's board scrambled to issue a statement promising enhanced protocols and system audits, but it was too late. Their reputation was hemorrhaging. Anonymous posts flooded logistics forums with insiders describing the company as a burning ship captained by ghosts. Inside Skybridge, we tried to stay focused. We'd just onboarded 3 major clients and were scaling faster than expected. Maya called an all-hands meeting to address the momentum and make sure we didn't lose ourselves in the whirlwind. "We're not here to gloat," she said. "We're here to build." But even as we built, the shadow of Novatrak's implosion followed us. More resumes came in. People from teams I hadn't spoken to in years reached out asking for a second chance, for a place where talent mattered more than titles. I couldn't take everyone, but I remembered every face that stood by me, and every face that had looked away. That week, I launched a new internal initiative, the Orion Fund. It was designed to support mid-career professionals, especially women and minorities, who had been pushed out of roles they'd spent years mastering. The goal wasn't just to hire. It was to rebuild confidence, skills, and futures. One of our first applicants was Marisol, a systems analyst who had once trained Kelsey, quietly in the background, never getting credit. She told me, "I used to think being invisible was the price of survival. Your story changed that." She's now leading a new feature development for Astra Route 2.0. As for Novatrak, their silence says everything. The ones who thought I was replaceable had written me off. Now they pay royalties to use my system, while I use that money to uplift the very people they overlooked. And this is just the beginning. 6 months after Novatrak's public collapse, I stood behind a glowing red TEDx sign, waiting for the cue to step onto the stage. The room was quiet but charged, filled with professionals, students, and leaders from industries I had once only hoped to break into. My talk was titled, "They Replaced Me with Her, I Replaced the System." It wasn't about revenge, it was about reclamation, of voice, of vision, of worth. I shared how a company built on hierarchy and favoritism had underestimated the very thing it depended on most: people who cared deeply, who built in silence, who created not for praise, but for progress. The response was overwhelming. The talk went viral within days. Comments poured in from engineers, project managers, analysts, people who had been dismissed, sidelined, or quietly replaced in favor of someone with a better connection or shinier title. The industry wasn't just watching anymore, it was listening. But the real twist came not from a headline, but from a knock on my door. Emma, a brilliant software architect who had once worked under Jordan and left in frustration, showed up at Skybridge's office with a portfolio and a quiet smile. "Your TEDx talk hit me harder than I expected," she said. "I want to be somewhere that builds people, not just systems." I hired her on the spot. And that same week, we launched Astra Route 2.0, featuring a predictive failure detection system I had once held back, waiting for the right environment to release it. Clients saw a 35% increase in efficiency within the first month. The system wasn't just smarter now, it was alive. Novatrak? They still exist technically. But their name has become a cautionary tale whispered in startup circles and boardrooms alike. No one asks about Kelsey, no one invites Ryan to panels, and every time a new client signs with us, they mention my name, not out of pity, but out of respect. Someone once told me I was too legacy to lead the future. Now the future wears my signature. They thought they burned my bridge, but I used the ashes to build a runway.